7 of Lens of Reflective Leadership. It is our last in our wrap up of Dr. Desautels' book, Connections Over Compliance. And we have guests today, Carrie. I'm going to introduce, yes, we have a central office perspective today, and we have a teacher perspective today. So I'm super excited to share with our viewers, all three of them, what we're doing with the Cadre and what we're doing with the work of Dr. D within our district as well. So I'm going to introduce first Sheila Hobbs. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're even here on this wonderful podcast with us.
Hi, I'm Sheila Hobbs. I'm the Director of Exceptional Ed with Richmond, and this is my 6th year doing that. Before that, I was a building level administrator for 7 years, but before that, I spent my life in special education and started my career in an alternative ed program with some of our most difficult kids. And I now believe that I'm here because people like Carrie Ann and Kirsten have entered my life. And when you know better, you do better. And so I'm here to try to help people learn more, and so that when we know better, we can do better.
Awesome. And thank you for joining us. I know your day is super busy today, so you're in between practices with your own kiddo. So thank you for taking time to jump on with us. And then I have Mrs. Shelby Ashbrook. Shelby, tell us about yourself.
I am Shelby. I am a special education teacher at Charles Elementary. So this is actually only my 2nd year at Charles and my 2nd year in special ed. Prior to that, I was in Fayette County working as a 1st grade teacher, but was very excited to make the switch over to Richmond. Thank you, Sheila, for convincing me.
Special ed extraordinaire.
And last year was my 1st year, but I jumped right on the opportunity to join that SEL Cadre when the opportunity came out, and it really has been life-changing. Something that I think fascinates me a little bit is that I am very new to this. I mean, it was just 5 years ago that I was in my undergrad courses, and none of these conversations were happening even then. So we talk a lot about, how new this thought process and this practice is to education, but it really is new. So I guess I'm here to talk about that with you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And we have touched base a little bit about the Cadre throughout all of our other podcasts. But Sheila, do you want to just, before we jump into the resources, do you want to just talk about the...
Sure. When Dr. Chuck Reynolds was here, we were looking at our grants that we had, and we were trying to align some things. Dr. Reynolds and I sat down and we looked at some of the work that Lori had done and some of the things that the elementary schools had done through Lori's work, thanks to what Carrie Ann had done based off of a webinar that we had watched. So it's kind of like this ever evolving since February of 2017 when I saw her. We shared a webinar out through our behavior specialist, and then lo and behold, when Dr. Reynolds and I sat down, we came up with this idea of trying to build a cadre after the idea that we had done with technology, and that seemed to be pretty successful with our technology initiatives that we were doing. So we decided to give it a shot. We had room for 40 applicants. We knew that we couldn't cover the subs, and so it's going to kind of be dicey with principals how you handled that. But we put that opportunity out there, and we were blessed enough in our corporation that a blessing and a curse maybe. We had to turn some folks away, so we had 40 plus applicants, but we ended up with 40, and then I think our final cadre, we ended up with 38. I think a couple had to drop out due to some family emergencies that happened through the year. But we have now 38 people that went through 6 sessions and intense all-day sessions with Dr. Lori. And so what we were able to do through that, and then in the middle of that, we had our last session actually a week before COVID hit.
Oh, wow.
And so when that happened, that kind of put a halt on everything. And I don't want to say a halt, but it definitely put a halt on us being able to get together and continue to grow the work as a group. But what we did see is people taking on, and, folks like Shelby, having administrators like you, Kirsten, and Carrie Ann's got some great teachers from the cadre in her building who are continuing that work. And but the leadership has taken on This year we've been able to meet one time face-to-face. I just got permission for us to go ahead and meet again face-to-face a couple more times this spring to really put some framework and some pillars around what we're doing. Because what we know is it's really best practices. It's not a program. It's not something that we're ever going to can. And because just like Shelby said, it's so very new. So we're super excited to be able to meet again a couple more times this spring. And I'm going to drag Carrie Ann and Kirsten to those meetings as we've had a couple high school administrators that were able to attend all of those. It's just really hard for principals to be out of buildings, but I'm going to drag the two of you in because I think the work that you've done just with your podcasts and what you guys are doing in your building, I think really will carry us being able to build some framework around what we know are best practices and give that to teachers in a way that they can use it.
Absolutely. And we've started looking at the work within our building, and Shelby can talk a little bit about that. This last year, we just took what was in the back of Dr. D's book. It was in a PDF that Sheila shared with me. I don't know, November, maybe September, October, somewhere around there. And we gave that to our staff. They each have this book. We've been working with our PBIS team. We know that the shift is still underway. It's not completely there. But Shelby, do you want to share some of the things that we've done as a building to promote the focused attention practices, but also not just having it as an SEL lesson, but having it as an overall everyday part of our routines and procedures?
Sure. So actually, back to right before COVID hit, we did a professional development for staff. It was that very same week, and Vicki Singh joined us. And we really just had a lot of conversation with our teachers about their brain states and, helping them to recognize that that is the most important thing that they can do each day is to recognize what their brain state is. And so from there, unfortunately, COVID did hit and things were kind of on at a halt. But since we've came back, I do feel like we have made an impact. Gosh, our kids, with coming back to us from COVID, they needed us more than ever with regulated brain states. But one thing that Kirsten and I do, there's 4 of us in our building and we rotate every week, and we are designing the SEL lessons for our teachers to use for virtual learning, but a lot of them are using those every morning in their classroom too. So we do read alouds. We have focused attention practices going every morning. Something that I do in my classroom, since it's an intervention, I have small groups in and out all day, but I've really tried to make sure one goal that I have is every single day my kids are doing at least one focused attention practice with me before they leave my classroom. And it's not a perfect practice. It doesn't happen every day. I mean, things come up, but that has definitely been a goal. And I mean, I've got second graders that use the language of focused attention practice. So it's been really cool to kind of see the shift in the building, especially with the kids, because we have their buy-in. So now we just need to get all the staff buy-in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I do hear, and Carrie can talk a little bit more, I do hear hot brain and I hear dysregulated and I hear I need a minute. And so they are, we're getting there.
Is your owl on your shoulder? I mean, yes, we do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a big thing. Our kiddos. Yep, absolutely.
Another thing that I think has made a huge difference is our partnership with, help me out. It's the More Than Words.
United Way.
United Way. They've done a lot of work in our buildings, just helping with teacher brain state. I mean, once a month, there's some kind of sweet little treat in the lounge that goes with that month's theme. So I think just little things like that have made a huge difference. So.
Absolutely. And we have to definitely give a shout out to Stam Coachline too, because we were able to rewrite our grants this year. And we put money in there specifically for adults because we knew that if adults weren't regulated, our kids weren't going to be regulated. And I just actually talked with Monica a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about that. And she even said, do you think we're going to have to do this next year too? And I was like, man, I hope not. I hope we're in a different spot. But if we're not, I appreciate your support because it is so vital to make sure we are able to offer opportunities. And that's what it is an opportunity for teachers to become reflective and to be able to monitor their own brain states. But a little love through some luncheons and bonding and safe relationships is always good too. So, Carrie, you were part of this, in the back. So we're really talking about this back piece of this book, and it has all of the resources in it. And Carrie was part of the 1920, what is it called? Cohort?
We were
Cohort.
Our cohort, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really loved about this particular book, and it's something that I use a lot with teachers, and you can go all the way back, it's 251, is we were actually charged or asked by Dr. Lori during that summer to try to start creating strategies for educator brain state. So the thing that was really nice about this is that it was regulatory practices, there are sensory practices depending on if you need a sensory moment, cortex, if you need a connection moment, that educators created for each other. And I always think that there's an awful lot of power in that. And so I find myself looking at this an awful lot as a principal when I'm thinking about things to introduce to faculty. The thing that's been kind of interesting for me, though, isn't that our faculty don't know what to do to regulate themselves. I don't want to use the word permission because that implies a level of authority that I have over my professionals, or that I don't exert over professionals in my building. But sometimes they do have to know that it's okay. I have a pair in my room. It's okay to exercise the opportunity to take a walk. Like, I need to regulate myself. And in order to be able to do that, I'm going to take a walk. I have an adult that I can trust that's watching my classroom, and I'm going to make that happen. So those were things that I think they needed to be able to hear. The other thing that I think that they needed to be able to hear is that it's really appropriate and okay if part of their prep period, and they don't get a very long one in our building, but if 5 to 6 minutes of that prep period, I don't have a time, I just threw that out, is used on the days that they need it for regulation as well. So that might mean that I walk by a classroom and there's, no kids in the room, the lights are dim, the educator is sitting at their desk, maybe they have an earbuds, they're listening to music. Like, they needed to know that those kinds of regulatory practices were okay, and that nobody was going to walk by and say, well, you didn't use your whole prep, why aren't you using your prep? Or why did you choose to walk around the building during your prep and, breathe some fresh air? Well, because maybe that 5 to 8 minute walk was probably more important than the 10 papers that they needed to grade or that they could have graded. So those were all things that in our building that we're still trying to work on and work through. But I really love that resource in the back.
Absolutely. And what about the surveys that are in the back? We've not done those. We've historically done the PBIS Swiss connection type of surveys, but I think I think it'll be a good pre-post. And I think once we get the vocabulary a little bit more firm in my building, as far as brain states, we'll see a lot of growth with the different surveys. But what do you think about the surveys that are back there?
Well, I like the surveys that are back here, but we made a decision as a team to use the PBIS Swiss surveys because there were some things that we needed to assess and address, including issues of equity.
Right.
And these surveys did not do that. So we were able to marry a little bit of the Swiss PBIS surveys that were out there, and then we were able to think about how those were brain aligned. So we've actually done those with our teachers, we've done those with our kiddos, and then we've done those with our parents. So those surveys are out, and then we'll have end of the year surveys as well. Those were really interesting to do. They're always really interesting to do. It was quite difficult to help some staff get through those when they started to see some of the results. And what we found when we looked at our surveys, generally speaking, is that kids' perceptions of each other are relatively low in relationship to making positive choices. So they felt often that a peer would engage in saying something to them that was derogatory or bullying in nature. And the thing that was really difficult for us to think about is that adults, teachers saw that too. So we thought about that in relationship to the framework and part of the pillars that we were putting in. And our hope is, like you, we're doing SEL activities every Friday. We're using parts of the United Way curriculum. We revised it a good deal. Katie Belongia and Ashley Gerard in our building were instrumental in doing that. And so we're hoping to see a difference in the way kids think about how they treat each other and the way that adults see kids treat each other at the end of the year.
Absolutely.
And that's
Sheila,
not even, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. I just admitted on a video that our kids are unkind to each other and that adults know that. Like, that makes me super uncomfortable to admit it. But we saw it, and then the issue becomes to address it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I
No,
have to
you're
acknowledge
good.
I'm uncomfortable right now.
You want to talk about it a little bit more?
Nope, that's a huge admit, though. Woo!
Transparent. Hey, it's lens of reflective. It's reflection,
I'm
right?
sweating.
Which
I'm
is the
sweating.
only way that we're going to get better. It's the only way. You got to put it out. Sheila, where do you see us going?
You come back and talk about the final survey, don't you?
Yeah. Where do you see us going as a district? I feel like, or how do you feel like we're doing? Where is our growth opportunity? What can we do better as a district? And then what are your thoughts for next year?
So one of the things that I've heard you say PBIS several times, so I'm going to start. Don't want to forget to go there, but one of the things that I think when we started this, and when I heard Lori for the first time in February of 2017, we heard trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's okay to be informed, but if you're not using what the information to put into practice, then it doesn't do any good to be informed. I can know a lot of things, but if I don't do anything with it, I'm not really making change. And so when we talk about PBIS in our district, PBIS has been here for a really, really long time. So those of us that are archaic, sorry, Shelby, you were just a twinkle in your mama's eye. When we brought PBIS, it served a real purpose. We were a district that was not looking for incentives or positives with kids, and we needed consistency across our corporations. The PBIS came in at just the right time to do and serve a very specific purpose. After talking to, I know Vicki has joined you guys on your podcast before, after spending some time talking to Vicki, because we were both here in the beginning of that, PBIS also comes with a discipline ladder, and PBIS comes with a connotation of negative and consequences. And so I think we have to, as a corporation, become reflective on that and say, do we need to be a PBIS district any longer? Or do we need to be a trauma responsive district? And I think that we need to be looking towards a trauma responsive and now moving to resiliency, because we have so many people who have done really great things in this work, and are pulling folks along, kicking and screaming sometimes, but still pulling them along. But I think we have to be responsive, and we have to really start moving towards resiliency. So my hope is, unlike how our cadre with technology worked, that we had new people every year, my hope is that we can continue to grow the group that we have, because I think there's so much information, and you guys know, Carrie Ann, you especially, going through Dr. Desautels' classes, it is, the research is fast and furious right now. It's so hard to keep up with. So we could not go with a new cadre every year, because you'd be starting over every time. So my goal, and the goal that I have our interim superintendent working towards, is saying this group stays together as a group of 40. We can add people to it. If we have a building that only has one or two people, because you really need to have a couple folks from every building, to have people to talk with and bounce ideas off of and reflect on your what's going on in your building. But our goal is yet this spring to have a few more sessions with the cadre as a group to build that framework that I talked about earlier, just kind of around the pillars. And Dr. Lori has 4 pillars. Vicki and I've looked at, and we're able to go a couple summers to go to some Star Global things in Michigan. And it's so fun for me, because I appreciate Dr. Lori and everything that she does, but she'll be the first one to tell you, just go find other people that are and see what they're saying too. I am not the end all be all, even though I really kind of think she is. But that she tells you to go look at other people's works too and see what they're doing. And so as Vicki and I have been talking, we're just looking at there really are 3 pillars. Because one of Lori's overlaps quite a bit, we feel like. And so we just have some really cool things happening. And I think that keeping the group together, as we move forward, I think is going to be key, more so than trying to have a new cadre. And I don't want to build numbers. I want to build depth within what we have so that we can continue to grow and feed the people outside the group, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure that I'm saying that exactly right, but having people like Shelby, having people like Jackie Aya at Crestdale, and we just have some really cool people in this group. Kaylin Hooker and Whitney Chereau at Star. Our high school group has been phenomenal. I mean, I've been really excited to see what our high school folks have done. So I think building depth within them and knowledge within them can continue to grow the work, even though you're not growing the number of people.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that's a good plan. You can always get buy-in from your people in the building, right? And peer pressure will eventually occur. But I think you do have to have those train the trainers. You're gonna
Yes.
continue to build the capacity within what you've already started. So that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
and I'd like to.
I'm sorry. I think these people kind of went through that end of the year where we were like rolling, and we had really picked up some steam, and then it was like screeching halt. And then this year everyone's trying to figure out how to teach a hybrid schedule with a virtual schedule with a face-to-face schedule, and so we had to kind of back off and say this is where we had to really monitor the educator brain state, because if we had given them more to take on, we weren't going to go anywhere. And then people would have thought SEL was something else. And we cannot ever get to where people ever think that SEL is something else. But SEL is just kind of the plate that holds everything.
Absolutely.
I will tell you too that I do know that probably kind of sort of maybe for sure there are SEL competencies coming out for our adults through the state of Indiana soon too. So those are really fun. I've really enjoyed being able to look at those over the last week or so. And I'm really hoping that the state picks up on those. There's been a little bit of a pause. We've had a change in state superintendents of instruction, which we all know. But that was just the 20th of January. And so it started, I've noticed in the last week, a little bit of a pickup where they had kind of left off after that initial pause. So really excited to see that too. It's a great place for us to start with the cadre too.
Absolutely. Shelby, I know that you're new to the special ed field. You've only been doing this for 2 years. And so Sheila can chime in too. But when we're thinking about accommodations in the back of the book, she's recommending the accommodations and how we're writing these for our special ed kids. And I have had multiple conversations about gen ed kids too. So do you want to talk about some of the work you've done with the cadre and how it's impacting, your day in and day out?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the biggest things, and the back of the book, there is a great resource because it talks about the traditional accommodations that you see in an IEP, and then it mirrors those accommodations through an ACE lens. So I'm just going to use an example from the book. The very first one, a traditional accommodation might be seating at the front of the class. But then when you look at it through the ACE lens, is I need a seat where I feel safe and secure. So really just completely changing, I think, your thought process when you are making these accommodations for these kiddos. And I know that's something that I've really worked on, especially, as I'm writing IEPs, especially just from last year to this year, is really being very strategic and what those accommodations look like and why you're putting those in there for those kiddos. And Kirsten and I have been having a lot of conversations, in our building, the two people who did cadre were the two special education teachers. And we have those resource rooms and they are full of amazing things. I mean, my classroom it really is my happy place, and the kids come in there and they have an abundance of resources to regulate. But the problem in that is that there aren't gen ed kids coming into my classroom. And so, we've been trying to have some conversations and thinking of what would it look like to try to get our gen ed population access to the resource room where all these great things are for them to use to regulate their brain states. So we're not there yet, but we are having that conversation and we are working on those things. I know when we did get to meet with the cadre back in the fall, it was just really cool to talk to, I think it was Whitney at Star, some of the great things they're doing. So hearing Sheila say that we are going to get to meet again this spring is very exciting to me because we learn best from our peers. And I would just love to go see what some of the other elementary schools have come up with. I know they were talking about an SEL team or SEL club or something at one point. So I don't know if they've got that going or not, and I got a little off of the accommodation question there. Sorry, Kirsten.
No, it's good. No, you're good. I think, well, and coming full circle, year one, we built a resource room for gen ed kids. And I promised, because we had over 500 kids in our elementary, I promised that the special ed team, I won't mix gen ed and special ed. And that's just kind of been the way it's been. But now our data, we don't have enough data to support a full resource room with a person for gen ed kids. But we know we have our high flyers that need that. And you've done a wonderful job already letting them come in and build that relationship with those kiddos, but making it more of a purposeful plan, I guess, and build in those behavior plans for the gen ed kids too.
Hey, Kirsten and Shelby, I don't mean to interrupt or tell you anything, but there's someone on this podcast that did an excellent job of building that for her building and reducing referrals and being extremely proactive. I feel blessed that I was the one thing that I can do from my position is push out resources, and that's really fun to watch. People like Carrie Ann and her staff, when she was at Star, build that resource room. So you got an expert right there on the call with you guys to help you do that. So she was instrumental in making that happen. She put all the right people in all the right places, and it made a huge difference in every aspect of that building at Star. So
I would tell you that the thing that's most significant about having Sheila on this webcast for Shelby and for Phillips and I is the dedicated focus and attention from a central office level. I have the impression sometimes when I'm with my cohort of people in my current courses, and all the time when I was working with Dr. Desautels at Butler and that cohort of people, that it is quite rare to have central office level support. And when we talk about that, it's more than just lip service. I think the thing that Sheila mentioned too is just the ability and the wherewithal to put money and resources in the places that they need to be as well. Sometimes people would walk into that little building at Star and they would look at the number of people that were there and they would be like, holy my gosh, I didn't have an office level team that ever said that to me. As long as I could show that we were using them and that things were changing for the better for kids. And I think that was the big piece. And I've found that to be true as I've continued my career. I think the only thing I would say over and over again to people at the central office level is that this body of research and this body of work is worth driving budgetary decisions. Because I know everybody's heavy in their budgets right now as they're getting ready to go into the next 18-month, 12-month rotation in the state of Indiana. And that empowering and teaching and leading this way with your principals and your staff is huge. So big shout out to Sheila. Star it had very little to do with me and everything to do with the right people being in the right places and people being willing and able to support the work there. And Phillips too. And I think she would say that as well.
Absolutely. And you always are so humble, and I do appreciate that. But the work that you, as a leader, to be able to go in and make those decisions, and to show a regulated staff, a regulated climate, and to go from a D to a B school, not 1 year, but 2, on the track for 3. I mean, that's amazing work, which is why Dr. D gave you some time in this book. So
yes.
You're so ridiculous. It's up. Our 30 minutes is up.
See, she'll cut time. Well, thank you so much, Shelby and Sheila, for joining us. So we are wrapping up Dr. D's book. And so you guys know Dr. D has asked to share all of these podcasts with different districts that she's going to be working with. So we're going to put together some type of a all in one so she can share it. I don't know why you guys want to listen to us because, we're just two plain Indiana girls from the country. So, but it's a humble honor to actually get emails from Dr. D every week saying I'm learning from you. So it's one of those things that keeps us driving. But we're moving on
You told me
to
to do this. I did it too soon though.
So no, we're moving on. This is our new book, Burnout. And I think wasn't he on or wasn't the author on Focus? Was it
Chase,
at the
is that Chase Milky?
Emily
Okay.
Nagasaki and Amelia Nagasaki. It's right here.
Mhm.
It's really good. I've already started just marking the heck out of it because there are all of these pieces this was introduced to me through another group of people, and I just couldn't stop reading it. And so I kind of pushed Phillips to move in this direction. I mean, I don't have to push her.
Amazon dropped it off yesterday. Well, I thought
anyway,
Focus on Inclusion.
This was really more about educator brain states. If I were the queen of everything and we had time, this is the book that I would do with my teachers.
Mhm.
Like, I love everything about it. So I look forward to starting that next week, I guess.
Absolutely. And Sheila, I thought that was on Focus on Inclusion this last week, but I know we talked a little bit about that burnout and
Yeah,
from what I watched. So
he did something on the burnout. It's called the burnout cure, but
that's what it is. Yeah.
It was very similar to what Carrie Ann's talking about. So I'm excited
Absolutely.
to see that book, Carrie Ann.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is very I mean, I knew I was done. I read the introduction and I saw myself in almost every page. And I was like, okay. And then the thing that I love about it is it doesn't just acknowledge that you're burnout. It really talks about how you stop it, how you stop that cycle of burnout, which I think we could all use right now. I don't know about you guys, but this has been a heck of a year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us, and it's Super Bowl Sunday, so go home and enjoy a little bit of football if you're a football fan, and have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon.